It's time to jump on board the crime crazy train in this episode of The Back Half. Do we have media perpetuating false perceptions about crime? We do. Do we have an infuriating fascist takeover of D.C. by an addle-brained wannabe dictator who is delighting at sicking our military on our own citizens? Who boy do we. And do we have comically ineffective gangs of FBI, DEA, Secret Service, and park police traipsing around the city in face masks and cosplaying as background characters in Zero Dark 30? You bet your sweet ass we do. Coming up on the back half. With everyone talking about crime in the big cities these days, particularly my adopted hometown of D.C., I wanted to add to the conversation by talking about all the crime I grew up with in rural Kentucky. I was still in elementary school in my little town of 300 or so people when my friend's father was murdered, shot to death in the cab of his truck. Juvenile delinquents broke into my father's body shop and stole a set of expensive wheels. Another bunch got into his junkyard, where he kept cars for spare parts and glass to use for repairs, and smashed every windshield, window, and mirror. I won't even get into all the fights that happened. I don't want to be here all day. But I can tell you I know two people who had parts of their noses bitten off in what might euphemistically be called physical altercations. Drinking and driving was rampant, with a cold beer and a koozie nestled in the crotch being one of the most popular automotive accessories. My dad fixed a lot of the wrecks that happened due to drinking and or drugs, so I saw at least some of the aftermath. Had a couple of classmates die in high school car crashes. It's not explicitly a crime, but I do remember when a couple kids from down the road accidentally killed their father when they were roughhousing in the truck cab while he was driving and set off the rifle in the gun rack. I worked at the local radio station, WPKY, and read the local crime news on air, basically a recitation of police reports that had been filed. Lots of assaults and burgling going on for a county of barely more than 10,000 people. I don't keep close track of current crime trends back home in Kentucky, but I do know that just a few years ago, pre-COVID, a pretty nice guy I went to high school with was murdered, gutted with a big knife in a parking lot. It all sounds like a terrible place to live when I lay it all out like that, and in some ways perhaps it is. Between violence and rampant drug use, rural America and its political representatives really should be taking care of their own business rather than sticking their, sometimes bitten, noses into the cities that so frighten them. But you can walk through my hometown and county, day or night, without any real fear of being a victim of crime, although even a small town has places where you adopt a little caution. Same goes for D.C., and for all the other supposed hellholes that terrify racist Southern and Midwestern representatives. The problem is non-critical reading, viewing, and reporting about crime, which does, has, and always will jack up fears of crime regardless of what crime is actually happening, or not happening. A couple days ago, the ever more quizzling Washington Post editorial board dropped this howler. Quote, "Violent crime has fallen over the past few years, as city officials note, but many residents still do not feel safe. Carjackings, for instance, have dropped after a surge in 2023, but they remain above pre-pandemic levels. High-profile incidents of violence underscore the problem, which local leaders cannot wave away." End quote. As a former journalist, let me interpret that for you. Crime is down, particularly from its peak pandemic surge, except for one cherry-picked category and a small number of incidents that we disproportionately covered, so our readers believe there's a crime wave when actually it's the opposite, so something must be done. That something apparently being a fascist takeover and military occupation. I wrote about imaginary crime waves about a year ago, just before the election, because it's long been a journalistic hobby horse of mine, and the Trump administration was mercilessly promoting an entirely fake crime surge. It is wildly easy to create an impression of a crime wave via mainstream mass media, and it's unethical to report on crime in such a way that you terrorize your own readers and viewers and give cover to right-wing politicians eager to strip those same people of their basic freedoms and self-government. I don't want to repeat myself by trying to reformulate the same arguments by shuffling around some sentences, so here's an encore of Crazy Train, and more relevant today than when I wrote it just before the election. Here we go. Crime drives people crazy. Not because of crime itself, it's the perception of crime that does it. I say this because we're in the midst of a cycle I've seen many times as a Gen X child of the 70s and 80s who grew up to be a journalist. When crime goes up, newspapers, magazines, and television shows fill themselves to the brim with stories of heartbreaking crime, spectacular crime, and terrifying crime. Opinion sections and investigative shows pick at the speculated reasons behind the crime increase, spinning ever more elaborate theories even if a pretty simple one is sitting right there. When crime goes down, well, the news is still filled with stories of murder, robbery, rape, and depravity because those things are rare. They're rare for the vast majority of people, even in a crime wave. And because they are rare, that makes them news. The absence or reduction of crime, not as newsy, so it doesn't get saturation coverage and quickly finds itself buried on inside pages or completely off the air. As a result of this, along with a very basic aspect of human nature, a certain large section of Americans will always believe that crime is up. Crime is worse than ever. Crime is a terrifying concern that demands harsh and punitive action from police and politicians. Point to declining crime rates and they vehemently disagree because they always know about a friend of a friend who was a victim of a heinous crime, so crime can't be going down. When it comes to crime, some people only believe statistics when crime is going up. When crime is going down, it's damn the statistics, only anecdotal evidence ahead. If I sound jaded to you, well, that's because I am. I moved to Washington, D.C. back in 1989, just before the city hit its absolute nadir with daily murders and muggings, plus the mayor getting nicked smoking crack at the Vista Hotel. During my early years in the city, with the height of the drug war raging, crime was a terrible fact of life. Nighttime gunfire was common, like crickets in the country. I had multiple friends who were mugged. One was dragged into an alley and beaten, then left to lie there while another mugger appeared to fight the first one over the spoils. My roommate was physically attacked and mugged on her morning walk to the metro. Here's the thing about crime. When it happens to someone who looks like you, that's when you get scared. And for a lot of white people at that time, crimes that affected black Washingtonians simply confirmed their preconceptions. It was crimes against white people that got them on the Law and Order ramparts. I should be clear here. I am not dismissing the crime that happened during that wave. It was horrific for everyone in the city, particularly those living in the so-called bad neighborhoods, where a combination of societal neglect, disrepair, poverty, and drugs created a nightmare scenario. And the crime was endemic, to the point where when I finally did get mugged, and yes, it seemed inevitable, it didn't happen when I was traipsing around nightclub districts at 1 a.m. drunkenly looking for an ATM. It happened just after 12 noon, a block from my 14th Street office, while I was on my lunch break. But it got better. It got better way faster than many ever believed it would. And not just in D.C., the nationwide historic rise in crime through the 70s and 80s crested in the 90s and fell rapidly after. There are a lot of theories as to why. The one regarding the gasoline-fueled presence of lead in our environment is what I find the most convincing. You can read a good roundup of that at the link in the show notes. But none come with ironclad proof. But I'm not here to debate those theories. Well, except to say that it wasn't fucking Rudy Giuliani and broken windows policing that did it. No matter how safe the nation's cities became, for a large portion of Americans, their opinions about them never changed. To them, crime would always be up and cities would always be cesspools of crime. It does not matter how far crime rates drop, Republicans will always run campaigns bemoaning the need for law and order. Absent real crime, local TV news will fill the gap with nonsensical stories about black teens to scare the suburbanites, like the old knockout game fiction. Other stories in this category include the perennial warnings that nefarious people are spiking Halloween candy with marijuana, MDMA, fentanyl, or whatever drug du jour has the media's attention. It doesn't matter if it never happened, and it never happened. Someone always has a friend who has a family member who knows it happened, and so on and so on. School shootings aside, and that's a uniquely American thing to say, we enjoyed downward trending crime for a couple of decades. What we didn't enjoy was a downward trend in crime coverage and politicization. So, crime went down, public perception of crime stayed up. Naturally, when American cities saw a sudden spike in crime a few short years ago, the old retrograde forces were ready to pounce, blaming the upswing on Black Lives Matter, Democratic mayors, transgender ideology, permissive schools, queer books in the library, or any number of boogeymen that sleep under the beds of right-wing law and order crowds. It was almost as if they hadn't noticed that the country was going through a societal disruption of a magnitude never seen before, with millions of people stuck at home, millions working frontline retail jobs for low pay and high risk, and millions of students suddenly without a structured school year. What's actually surprising is that more of us didn't kill each other. Sure, correlation is not causation, but come on, we know why crime went up. And we know why it came back down. Society has come back to normal, however wise that return may or may not have been. You don't need to be an epidemiologist or statistician or FBI analyst to look at the graphs with downward trending crime and look at the calendar with receding societal disruption and see what's going on. But it doesn't matter how far crime drops. For Donald Trump, the year is always 1988. The crime wave never ends, and the Central Park Five should still be executed for a crime they didn't commit because his followers believe cities and immigrants are to be feared. It is truly crazy. Irrational fear of crime is why tourists come to D.C. or New York, then won't walk more than a block from their hotels after 5 p.m. Irrational fear is why instead of neighborhood police officers, we have poorly trained wannabe soldiers cosplaying at war with discounted deadly weapons, absurd body armor, and military attack vehicles. I wish I had an answer for this, but the problem is as old as America itself, where lurid stories of crime and resulting panics were around before we even were America. In 1734, future founder Ben Franklin contributed to the Pennsylvania Gazette this sensationalist telling of the murder of a 14-year-old girl by her parents, turning her out of doors and thereby exposing her to such hardships as afterwards produced grievous sickness and lameness, during which, instead of supplying her with necessities and due attendance, they treated her with the utmost cruelty and barbarity, suffering her to lie and rot in her nastiness, and when she cried for bread, giving her into her mouth with an iron ladle her own excrements to eat, with a great number of other circumstances of the like nature, so that she languished and at length died. Modernize the language and you have a Netflix true crime series. In the late 1800s, pioneering muckraking reporter Lincoln Steffens created a New York City crime wave, recounted in his autobiography with the helpful chapter heading, I Make a Crime Wave, by competing with fellow muckraker Jacob Riis to fill column inches with details of all the police reports of crime they would normally skip over. More newspapers soon joined in. After a few weeks, this led to a citywide panic over this supposedly unprecedented wave of criminality. New York City Mayor Teddy Roosevelt stepped in to put a stop to it. I enjoy a crime wave, Steffens wrote, explaining the truth behind the moralistic campaigns against them and citizen fears of them, since they were so often created from whole cloth. Steffens said, I feel that I know something the wise men do not know about crime waves, and so get a certain sense of happy superiority out of reading editorials, sermons, speeches, and learned theses on my specialty. There's a reason people have always thought reporters are assholes. Roosevelt himself, on becoming president, presided over a country that launched the 20th century with renewed hysteria over immigrants, all those dirty Irish and Italians, who were spreading crime and filth and threatening good, wholesome American values. Plus ça change, what is old is new again, all of this has happened before, all of this will happen again. Trump and his pocket potentate J.D. Vance know what they're doing. Well, at least Vance does. Who knows what Trump does or does not believe in that addled mind of his. They do it because they believe it will work, that enough Americans will always be primed to believe the worst, facts be damned. And it will work unless we do everything we can to make sure it doesn't, at least for today and for this time, and this time in D.C. I doubt we can change human nature, but we can change what's happening now. Fight back. Help those at risk. Hound your representatives at every level. No one is going to do it for us, so let's do it for ourselves. And that's it for this episode. Thank you for listening. Please do like and subscribe. You can find a lot more content at the back half at Substack. That would be backhalfbug.com. And I'll see you again soon.